The Anchor Tavern had been a fixture in downtown Oceanside for 43 years, serving everyone from active-duty Marines from nearby Camp Pendleton to retired veterans who'd made this coastal California town their home. On this particular Tuesday evening, the bar was quieter than usual, just a handful of regulars nursing their drinks and watching the Padres game on the mounted televisions. Frank "Bulldog" Peterson sat alone at the far end of the bar, his weathered hands wrapped around a simple Budweiser. At 67, Frank looked every one of his years. His hair had gone completely gray, deep lines etched around his eyes from decades of squinting against sun and salt spray. He wore a faded navy t-shirt and worn jeans, nothing that would immediately identify him as someone special. To most casual observers, he looked like any other aging veteran trying to make his retirement dollars stretch. But Frank Peterson wasn't just any veteran. For 32 years, he'd served in the United States Navy, with 28 of those years as a Navy SEAL. He'd done 6 deployments to Vietnam, 4 to the Persian Gulf, 3 to Afghanistan, and countless classified operations that would never appear in any official record. He'd earned 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and the respect of every man he'd ever served alongside. Tonight, though, he was just a tired old man having a quiet beer and thinking about his late wife Margaret, who'd passed 8 months ago after 41 years of marriage. The peace was shattered when the front door burst open and 4 young men stumbled in, already well into their evening of bar hopping. They looked to be in their early 20s, dressed in expensive casual wear that screamed trust fund kids playing at being tough. The loudest of the group, a blonde kid with a spray tan and designer stubble, immediately started complaining to his friends. "This place is a dump," Tyler Morrison announced, loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. "Why did we come here again?" "Because Jake said the drinks were cheap and there wouldn't be any cops watching," replied his friend Connor, scanning the bar with the kind of entitled disdain that came from never having been told no in his entire life. Jake Martinez, the apparent leader of their little group, pointed toward the bar. "Plus, look at this crowd. A bunch of old-timers who probably don't even know what century it is. We can do whatever we want." The 4th member of their group, Austin Webb, was already pulling out his phone to record. "Dude, we should totally livestream this. My followers would eat this up." Frank continued nursing his beer, hoping the kids would order their drinks and leave him in peace. He'd encountered their type before. Privileged college kids who thought the world owed them something, who'd never worked a day in their lives or faced any real consequences for their actions. Tyler swaggered over to the bar, deliberately choosing the stool right next to Frank, despite the dozen empty seats available. "Bartender," he shouted, even though the bartender, a quiet man named Eddie, was only 10 feet away. "What can I get you?" Eddie asked politely, though Frank could see the resignation in his eyes. Eddie had been tending bar long enough to recognize trouble when it walked through his door. "4 shots of your most expensive whiskey," Tyler demanded, "and make them doubles." "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Eddie asked as he poured. "My acceptance to law school," Tyler grinned. "My dad's connections finally paid off. Turns out having a federal judge in the family opens doors, even when your grades suck." Connor laughed loudly. "Dude, remember when you thought you might actually have to join the military? Like some kind of peasant?" "No way," Tyler scoffed. "Military service is for people who don't have any other options. Poor kids who need the government to pay for college. I've got better things to do with my life than play soldier." Frank's grip tightened slightly around his beer bottle, but he said nothing. Jake noticed Frank's reaction and nudged Tyler. "Hey, check out Grandpa over there. I think we hurt his feelings." Tyler turned to look at Frank, his eyes taking in the navy t-shirt and the man's weathered appearance. "Oh, what? Are you some kind of military guy, old man?" Frank looked up from his beer, meeting Tyler's eyes with a steady gaze. "I served, yes." "Served what? Coffee at the mess hall?" Connor laughed at his own joke. "I was in the Navy," Frank said quietly. Austin held up his phone, making sure he was capturing everything. "This is perfect. Old military guy getting triggered. My followers are gonna love this." "What did you do in the Navy?" Tyler asked with mock seriousness. "Were you like a cook or something? Fixed engines?" "I was a SEAL," Frank replied simply. The 4 young men burst into laughter. Jake nearly spilled his drink. "A SEAL? Dude, You're like 100 years old. Navy SEALs are supposed to be badasses, not old guys drinking alone in dive bars. Yeah, right, Connor added. Next you're gonna tell us you were in Vietnam and saved America or something. Frank took a long sip of his beer before responding. I did 3 tours in Vietnam, among other places. Oh my God, he's one of those guys, Tyler said, rolling his eyes. Listen, Grandpa, we get it. You want us to think you're some kind of war hero. But look at you. You're just a sad old man making up stories to impress people. I'm not trying to impress anyone, Frank said calmly. You asked what I did. I told you. Austin pointed his phone directly at Frank's face. Say it again for the camera, old man. Tell everyone how you were a big tough Navy SEAL. Frank looked at the phone, then back at Austin. Turn that off. Or what? You gonna karate chop me? Austin laughed. Dude, you can barely hold your beer steady? Your hands are shaking. It was true. Frank's hands did have a slight tremor, the result of 3 decades of handling explosives, weapons, and the accumulated stress of more combat deployments than most people could imagine. But to these kids, it just looked like the weakness of old age. Come on, tell us a war story, Jake taunted. Did you kill anyone? Rescue any prisoners? Or did you just sit on a boat somewhere pretending to be important? Frank signaled to Eddie for another beer. I think you boys have had enough to drink. Maybe you should head home. We'll leave when we want to leave, Tyler snapped. This is America, old man. We don't have to listen to some washed-up soldier who probably never even saw real combat. Marine, Frank corrected quietly. You said soldier. I was Navy, not Army. If you're going to insult my service, at least get the branch right. Connor laughed. Oh, he's getting technical now. What's next? Gonna lecture us about military protocol. Yeah, Jake added. Maybe tell us about the good old days when America was great and you guys were winning wars instead of losing them. Frank's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. Every war has its purpose. Every person who serves has their reason. You don't have to agree with the politics, but you should respect the sacrifice. Sacrifice? Tyler scoffed. What sacrifice? You got paid, didn't you? Got free healthcare, college money, all that government welfare. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Some things are worth more than money, Frank said quietly. Like what? Glory? Honor? Austin was still recording, loving every minute of this. Dude, this is 2024. Nobody cares about that old-school military honor bullshit anymore. 23 good men I served with never made it home, Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. They gave everything. That's not bullshit to me. Oh, here we go, Connor groaned. The dead soldier guilt trip. Classic move, Grandpa. Frank stood up slowly, leaving money on the bar for his drinks. I think I'll head home. Running away? Tyler challenged. What happened to all that SEAL training? Thought you guys never backed down from a fight. Picking a fight with a bunch of drunk kids isn't what we trained for, Frank replied, pulling on his jacket. Kids? Jake laughed. We're adults, old man. And we're not afraid of some geriatric pretending to be a war hero. Frank paused at the word pretending. That crossed a line. He turned back to face the 4 young men, and for just a moment, something in his eyes made them all take a small step back. Pretending? Frank asked quietly. Yeah, pretending, Tyler said, though with slightly less confidence than before. I mean, come on. Look at you. You're what, 7? If you were really some badass Navy SEAL, where all your buddies? Why are you drinking alone in a dump like this? Real heroes don't end up like you. Frank reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn business card. He placed it on the bar in front of Tyler. My name is Frank Peterson, Master Chief Petty Officer, retired. SEAL Team 5. If you want to verify my service record, there's the contact information for the Naval Special Warfare Command. Tyler glanced at the card but didn't pick it up. Anyone can get cards printed. That doesn't prove anything. You're right, Frank said. It doesn't. He pulled out his phone, an old flip phone that made the young men snicker, and scrolled through his contacts. He found the number he was looking for and hit send. Hey, Bulldog, came a voice on the other end, loud enough for the others to hear. What's going on? Hey, Gunny. I'm at the Anchor. Got a situation here. Some young men who don't believe I served. Think I'm making up stories." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious." "How many of them?" "4. Give me 20 minutes." Frank hung up and looked at the 4 young men, who were now looking slightly less confident. "My friends will be here shortly. You're welcome to stay and meet them, or you can leave. Your choice." "Friends?" Connor laughed, but it sounded forced. "What? Other old guys from the nursing home?" "Something like that," Frank said, sitting back down at the bar. Tyler tried to regain his bravado. "You think we're scared of a bunch of senior citizens? This isn't West Side Story, Grandpa. Your geriatric gang isn't gonna intimidate us." Frank ordered another beer and checked his watch. 18 minutes. The next 18 minutes felt like the longest in the young men's lives. They tried to continue their drinking and laughing, but there was a tension in the air now. Frank sat quietly at the bar, occasionally checking his phone and not seeming worried about anything. Eddie, the bartender, found excuses to stay close to the bar, and the other patrons had moved to tables farther away from the confrontation. At exactly 20 minutes, the front door of the Anchor Tavern opened. The first man through the door was Hispanic, about 50 years old, built like a brick wall despite his age. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, but there was something about the way he moved that immediately commanded attention. Behind him came 5 more men, all between 45 and 60, all carrying themselves with the same quiet confidence. Frank stood up and embraced the first man. "Thanks for coming, Gunny. Wouldn't miss it, Bulldog." "Boys," he said, nodding to the others, "meet the kids who think our Master Chief here is a fake." The 6 men arranged themselves casually around the bar area, not threatening, not aggressive, but creating a presence that filled the entire space. Tyler, Connor, Jake and Austin suddenly felt very small. "Gentlemen," said Gunny, addressing the 4 young men with polite formality, "I'm Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez, United States Marine Corps, retired. I had the honor of serving alongside Master Chief Peterson on 4 separate deployments. These other gentlemen had similar experiences." He gestured to each man in turn. "Chief Petty Officer James Wright, Navy SEAL, retired. Served with the Master Chief in Afghanistan and Iraq. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Connor, Force Recon Marine, served with us in the Gulf. Senior Chief David Kim, Navy SEAL, retired. 3 deployments with Bulldog here. Petty Officer First Class Tony Rodriguez, Navy SEAL, retired. And Sergeant Major William Hayes, Marine Special Operations, retired." Each man nodded as he was introduced, but none of them smiled. Tyler's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're all real?" "As real as it gets, son," Chief Wright replied. "Frank Peterson is one of the finest men I've ever served with. Saved my life in Fallujah. Saved all our lives at one time or another." Austin had stopped recording, his phone hanging limply at his side. "Master Chief Peterson," Sergeant Major Hayes said formally, "these young men giving you trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle, Sergeant Major. They just had some questions about my service record." Connor found his voice. We didn't know. We didn't mean any disrespect." "Didn't mean any disrespect," Senior Chief Kim repeated. "Son, what exactly did you think you were doing?" Jake swallowed hard. We were drunk. We were being stupid." "Yeah, you were," Petty Officer Rodriguez agreed. "Question is, what are you gonna do about it?" Tyler looked around at the 6 veterans surrounding them, then at Frank, who was calmly sipping his beer as if nothing unusual was happening. "Master Chief Peterson," Tyler said, his voice shaking slightly, I'm sorry. We were completely out of line." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "What are you sorry for?" "Exactly." For disrespecting your service, for calling you a liar, Tyler's voice broke slightly, "for disrespecting all the men who didn't make it home." Frank nodded slowly. "That's a start." Gunny Martinez stepped forward. "Boys, let me explain something to you. Master Chief Peterson has more combat decorations than most people have t-shirts. He's pulled wounded men out of firefights, led missions behind enemy lines, and served this country with more honor and distinction than you'll ever understand. But more than that," Chief Wright added, "he's the kind of man who still comes to every funeral when one of his brothers passes. He still checks on the families of men who died 20 years ago. He still mentors young SEALs, even though he's been retired for 15 years. The reason he's drinking alone tonight, Senior Chief Kim said quietly, is because his wife of 41 years passed away 8 months ago, and he's still grieving. She was a Navy wife who supported him through 3 decades of deployments, who raised their children while he was overseas, who never complained about the life she chose when she married a warrior. The 4 young men stood in stunned silence. Staff Sergeant O'Connor looked directly at Austin. "You were recording this for your social media followers? You thought it would be funny to humiliate an old veteran?" Austin couldn't meet his eyes. "I deleted it. I'm not posting anything." "Good choice, Sergeant Major Hayes, because if we saw that video online, we'd have a very different conversation." Frank finished his beer and stood up. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming, but I think these young men have learned what they needed to learn." "You sure, Bulldog?" Gunny asked. "We don't mind staying. I'm sure." "Boys," Frank addressed Tyler, Connor, Jake, and Austin, "you want to make this right?" They nodded eagerly. "Then live your lives in a way that honors the freedoms you've been given. Use the opportunities you have to do something meaningful. And remember that someday, you'll be old too. Remember how you want to be treated when that day comes." Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Master Chief, please let us pay for your drinks. All of them. It's the least we can do." Frank shook his head. "Keep your money. But if you really want to do something meaningful, there's a veterans center downtown that could use donations. A lot of guys coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan are having a hard time adjusting. Your money would do more good there than buying me beer." Connor nodded vigorously. "We'll do that tomorrow. We'll all make donations." "And maybe," Jake added quietly, "maybe we could volunteer sometime, if they'd have us." Frank smiled for the first time that evening. "I think they'd appreciate that. Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing." One by one, the 4 young men approached Frank and shook his hand, each offering a genuine apology. They left the bar quietly, their evening of partying forgotten. As the door closed behind them, Gunny turned to Frank. "You think they learned anything?" Frank shrugged. "Maybe. At their age, I thought I knew everything too. Took the Navy to teach me different." Chief Wright clapped Frank on the shoulder. "You okay, though? Really?" Frank looked around at his brothers in arms, men who had dropped everything and driven across the county because he'd asked them to. Men who would continue to have his back until the day they died, just as he would have theirs. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm okay." Petty Officer Rodriguez grinned. "So, who's buying the next round? Because I drove 40 minutes to get here, and I'm not leaving without at least 1 beer." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the sound of men who had been through hell together and come out the other side as brothers. As they settled in around the bar, sharing stories and catching up on each other's lives, Frank realized that Margaret would have loved this moment. She always said that his Navy family was their family too. Outside, Tyler sat in his car for a long time before starting the engine. He thought about Master Chief Peterson, sitting alone at the bar, grieving his wife while strangers mocked his service. He thought about the 6 men who had come running when their brother needed them, 15 years after their military service had ended. He pulled out his phone and deleted the video he'd recorded. Then he looked up the address for the Veterans Center downtown. Tomorrow he would make that donation. And maybe, if he was lucky, he would learn something about the kind of man he wanted to become. 3 weeks later, Tyler Morrison, Connor Walsh, Jake Martinez, and Austin Webb became regular volunteers at the San Diego Veterans Resource Center. They helped with everything from filing paperwork to serving meals to recently returned veterans. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful work. And once a month, they would stop by the Anchor Tavern, not to drink and cause trouble, but to buy a beer for an old Navy SEAL named Frank Peterson and listen to his stories about brotherhood, service, and the kind of honor that lasts long after the uniform comes off. Frank never told them that he'd already forgiven them that first night, but he was proud to watch them grow into the kind of men their country needed, men who understood that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from building them up. In the end, that's what service was really about, making sure the next generation understood what was worth fighting for and what was worth preserving. And sometimes, that lesson came not in a classroom or a speech, but in a dive bar in Oceanside, where old warriors gathered to honor the brotherhood that time and distance could never break. 2 years later, Frank Peterson stood at the podium of the San Diego Veterans Resource Center's new community room, looking out at a crowd of over 200 people gathered for the center's annual fundraising dinner. The room had been named the Margaret Peterson Memorial Hall, funded entirely by donations from Tyler Morrison's Family Foundation. "When I first met these 4 young men," Frank began, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "they thought military service was something only poor kids did when they had no other options. Tonight I'm proud to introduce you to 4 of our most dedicated volunteers, who have given over 3,000 hours of their time to supporting veterans in our community." Tyler Morrison, now in his 3rd year of law school, stepped forward with his friend. But they weren't the same arrogant kids who'd stumbled into the Anchor Tavern that night. Connor had changed his major to social work and now ran support groups for veterans with PTSD. Jake had joined the Peace Corps and just returned from 2 years in rural Guatemala. Austin had deleted his social media accounts and become a documentary filmmaker focusing on veteran stories. "Master Chief Peterson taught us that honor isn't something you're born with," Tyler said, addressing the crowd. "It's something you earn through service to others. We thought we were better than him because of our age, our education, our family connections. We learned that night that character isn't measured by what your father does or where you went to school. It's measured by how you treat people when nobody's watching, and how you respond when you realize you've been wrong." In the audience, Frank Seal brothers sat at the head table, now regular fixtures at the center's events. They'd helped establish a mentorship program, pairing young veterans with older ones, creating the same brotherhood that had sustained them through decades of service. Frank looked out at the faces in the crowd, veterans from Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts most civilians had never heard of. Some were thriving, some were struggling, but all were part of a family that understood sacrifice in ways the civilian world rarely did. "Margaret used to say that the best victories aren't the ones where you defeat your enemy," Frank continued, his voice growing stronger. "They're the ones where you turn your enemy into an ally." These young men weren't really our enemies that night 2 years ago. They were just lost, looking for purpose, trying to figure out who they wanted to be. Sometimes all it takes is someone showing them there's a better way. After the dinner, as the crowd began to disperse, Tyler approached Frank one more time. "Master Chief, I wanted you to know, I passed the bar exam last week. I'm going to be working for the Veterans Legal Aid Society, helping guys navigate the VA system, fighting for disability claims, that kind of thing." Frank smiled and shook his hand. Margaret would have been proud of that. She always said the best way to honor those who serve is to make sure they're taken care of when they come home. "There's something else," Tyler said, his voice more serious. "My father, the federal judge I mentioned that night, he wants to meet you. He said any man who could turn his spoiled son into someone worth respecting deserves his personal thanks." Frank chuckled. "Your father raised a good kid. He just needed to find his way." As the evening wound down, Frank stood outside the community center, looking up at the stars. Gunny Martinez joined him, along with the rest of their old team. "You ever think about that night at the Anchor?" Gunny asked. "All the time," Frank replied. "Not because of those kids, though. Because it reminded me that we're never really done serving. The uniform comes off, but the mission continues." Chief Wright nodded, "Teaching the next generation what honor looks like. Making sure the sacrifice meant something," added Senior Chief Kim. Frank thought about Margaret, about the 23 brothers who never made it home, about all the young veterans who were still finding their way in a world that didn't always understand them. He thought about 4 privileged kids who'd learned that true privilege came with responsibility, and that real strength was measured by how you lifted others up. "The mission never ends," he said quietly. "It just changes form." As his brothers said their goodbyes and headed home to their families, Frank remained outside for a few more minutes. The stars were the same ones he'd looked at from ships in the South China Sea, from mountains in Afghanistan, from deserts in Iraq. They were the same stars Margaret had looked at while he was deployed, the same ones that had guided him home to her arms time and time again. Now they guided him to a different kind of mission, one that didn't require weapons or tactics or strategic planning. It required patience, wisdom, and the understanding that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but in the hearts and minds of people right here at home. Frank Peterson, Master Chief Petty Officer, retired, had found his new purpose, and somewhere in the stars above, he was certain Margaret was smiling.